Joining us now is Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. attorney, former senior FBI official. Chuck, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here tonight.
My pleasure, Rachel.
What do we know about how Mark Meadows did today? How good his case is that his trial should be moved to federal court?
Yeah, so there's a three-part Supreme Court test that's important that I want to talk to you about. In order to get plucked out of state court, as you described, he would have to show that he was a federal official. He was. That part's easy. That he was acting within the scope of his federal authority. That part's hard. And the third piece, Rachel, that he would have a colorable federal defense if the case were moved from state to federal court. And at least for this stage of the proceedings, that part's pretty easy. So let's focus on number two. Was he acting within the scope of his federal authority? I think that's a hard thing for him to show.
Okay, so the Supreme Court just handed Trump more power than any president has had in decades. And Democrats, they're losing their minds, like literally racing to impeach him before he can use it. This is wild. Here's what happened. Late October 2025, the Supreme Court dropped a ruling that basically says Trump can do whatever he wants with the executive branch, fire whoever he wants, block Congress from seeing documents, make decisions that used to require oversight. And now, courts can't even stop him, even if what he's doing might be illegal. Yeah, you heard that right. And the timing could not be worse or better, depending on which side you're on. Because this ruling didn't just give Trump new tools, it gave Democrats the exact fuel they needed to push impeachment into overdrive. They're not even hiding it anymore. They're citing this Supreme Court decision as proof that Trump needs to be removed right now, before his term is up. And the reaction has been absolutely explosive on both sides. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us. Be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Chuck, why is it that every smart lawyer in the country looking at the news today said that it was shocking that Mark Meadows decided to take the stand and testify, let alone for 5 hours in this hearing?
Yeah, simply because he didn't have to, Rachel. I mean, his side could have tried to meet their burden of proof, and it was their burden of proof today, by putting in affidavits or calling other witnesses. But remember, he's a defendant in a criminal case, and so anything he says can be used against him in that case. That's pretty treacherous. I mean, it's one thing for him to answer questions from his own attorneys. That could be scripted, that could be prepped, that could be tested.
Justice Sonia Sotomayor called it a grave threat to the Constitution. She's warning about unchecked presidential action, separation of powers, gone, checks and balances, barely hanging on, and Trump's already using these new powers to slash federal agencies and freeze money that Congress approved. This isn't theory anymore. This is happening. Federal workers are getting pink slips. Programs are getting defunded. And Congress is watching from the sidelines because they can't do anything about it. So here's where it gets even crazier. The House just introduced new articles of impeachment. They're going after Trump for violating the emoluments clause, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. And they're not messing around this time. They've got momentum. They've got public anger. And now they've got the Supreme Court ruling to point at and say, see, this is why we need to act. The Democratic leadership is holding emergency meetings. They're whipping votes. They're preparing for what could be the fastest impeachment process in American history because they know time is running out. But here's the thing nobody's talking about. This Supreme Court ruling, it didn't come out of nowhere. The court's been using something called the shadow docket, basically fast-track decisions with no public hearings, no oral arguments, just boom, here's your ruling. And they've been doing it a lot lately for Trump, which means this pattern of giving the president more and more power has been building for months. And that's not by accident. This has been a deliberate strategy to reshape executive authority without the usual scrutiny that comes with normal Supreme Court cases. Legal experts have been sounding the alarm about the shadow docket for over a year now. They've been saying, look, this is dangerous. This is how you fundamentally change the structure of government without anyone really noticing until it's too late. And guess what? They were right, because here we are facing a constitutional crisis that most Americans didn't see coming. And that's what makes this so dangerous, because it's not just about Trump anymore. Whatever precedent gets set here, the next president gets to use it too, and the one after that. So if you think this is just partisan drama, you're missing the bigger picture. This is about how much power one person should have, and whether anyone can stop them if they go too far. Democrats are screaming that Trump's turning into a king, Republicans are saying he's just doing his job without interference from bureaucrats who hate him. And both sides, they're betting everything on the 2026 midterms, because whoever wins Congress next year gets to decide if Trump finishes his term or gets removed before then. The stakes could not be higher. We're talking about a constitutional crisis in real time. The Supreme Court just rewrote the rules. Trump's using his new powers immediately, and Democrats are trying to impeach him before he can cement these changes permanently. This isn't cable news drama. This is the future of American government getting decided right now. Constitutional scholars are saying we haven't seen anything like this since the Nixon era, except back then, the courts were willing to check presidential power. Now, not so much. So yeah, buckle up, because what happens next is going to define how presidents operate for generations, and nobody knows how this ends. All right, let's actually break down what this Supreme Court ruling means, because most people are missing the details here, and the details are what matter. The ruling came down in late October 2025, and what it basically says is this: the president has broad authority over executive branch decisions, hiring, firing, policy changes, enforcement priorities. All of it falls under presidential power. And here's the kicker: courts have limited ability to intervene, even if someone argues the president's actions are illegal or unconstitutional. Now, you might be thinking, wait, isn't that how it's always been? And the answer is sort of, but not really, because before this ruling, courts could step in if a president clearly violated the law. Congress could demand documents and testimony. Federal agencies had some independence. There were checks, there were balances, slow, frustrating, bureaucratic, but they existed. This ruling changes that. It says, the president's control over the executive branch is so strong that courts should stay out unless there's absolutely no question that the law was broken. And even then, it's murky, because the ruling uses language that basically gives the president the benefit of the doubt in almost every situation. So we're not talking about small adjustments to existing law here. We're talking about a fundamental reimagining of how much power the presidency holds. And that has massive implications for everything from environmental policy to law enforcement to foreign relations. So what does that mean in practice? Well, Trump's already shown us he's been slashing staff at federal agencies. The EPA lost nearly 40% of its workforce in the last month. The Department of Education gutted. The FBI undergoing what Trump calls a restructuring, but what critics call a purge of anyone who might investigate him. He's freezing money that Congress appropriated for specific programs. Infrastructure projects are on hold, climate initiatives are canceled, foreign aid is suspended, and he's ignoring subpoenas from House committees. When Congress demands documents, the White House just says no. When they demand testimony, Trump officials don't show up. And when people sue to stop him, the courts are throwing out the cases because of this ruling, because the Supreme Court said the president's power in these areas is too broad to challenge. Lower court judges are literally citing this October ruling as the reason they can't intervene. Even when the violations seem obvious, even when career prosecutors are saying laws are being broken, the courts are saying sorry, our hands are tied. And here's where Democrats are freaking out, because they're saying this isn't just about policy disagreements anymore. They're saying Trump is violating the Constitution, specifically the Emoluments Clause, which says the president can't profit from foreign governments while in office. And they've got evidence, financial records showing payments from foreign entities to Trump properties, contracts signed while he's been president, deals that benefit his businesses, lease agreements with foreign governments for space in Trump Tower, trademark approvals in countries where Trump just happened to ease sanctions or increase aid. The pattern is clear, Democrats argue. But here's the problem. Even with evidence, they couldn't get courts to act before this Supreme Court ruling. And now, after the ruling, it's basically impossible. Because the court said executive branch decisions, including decisions about the president's own conduct, are off limits for judicial review in most cases. Think about that for a second. The president can potentially profit from his position, and the courts can't touch it. That's a massive shift from how things used to work. It essentially removes one of the most important accountability mechanisms in our system. Can you believe this? Like, this is the system we're working with now. So Democrats decided, okay, if the courts won't stop him, we will. That's where impeachment comes in. Because impeachment is a political process, not a legal one. It doesn't go through courts, it goes through Congress. Which means the Supreme Court ruling doesn't protect Trump from impeachment, it just protects him from almost everything else. The new articles of impeachment focus on three things. First, emoluments violations, profiting from foreign governments. They've documented over 24 instances where Trump businesses received payments from foreign entities while Trump made policy decisions affecting those same countries. Second, obstruction of justice, blocking investigations and ignoring subpoenas. The House has a list of over 50 subpoenas that Trump has simply refused to comply with. Third, abuse of power, using executive authority to punish political enemies and reward allies. There's evidence of Trump directing the IRS to audit critics, evidence of federal contracts going to Trump supporters, evidence of agencies being weaponized against political opponents. And Democrats aren't being subtle about why they're doing this now. They're literally citing the Supreme Court ruling as justification. They're saying, look, the court just gave Trump unchecked power. If we don't impeach him, there's no way to hold him accountable. This is our last option. Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries gave a press conference last week where he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, we are witnessing the collapse of constitutional government. The Supreme Court has abdicated its responsibility, so Congress must act. But here's where it gets complicated, because impeachment requires a majority in the House and 2/3 in the Senate. Democrats have the House, barely. They've got a 6-seat majority, which means they can't afford many defections. But the Senate, Republicans control it, 52-48, which means even if the House impeaches Trump again, he's not getting removed unless at least 17 Republican senators turn on him. And so far, that's not happening. In fact, most Republican senators are doubling down on their support, saying this is just another partisan witch hunt. Senator Lindsey Graham called it a disgrace. Senator Ted Cruz said Democrats are trying to overturn the will of the people. And Senate Majority Leader is already promising a quick acquittal if it gets to trial. So what's the point? Why push impeachment if it's not going to work? Well, Democrats have a few reasons. First, it puts Republican senators on the record. They have to vote, and those votes will matter in 2026 when they're up for re-election. Vulnerable Republicans in swing states are going to have to explain why they voted to protect the president who the evidence shows violated the Constitution. Second, it keeps the pressure on Trump, makes it harder for him to use his new powers freely. If he's fighting impeachment, he's not spending all his time consolidating power. Third, it rallies the Democratic base heading into the midterms. Progressives have been demanding action for months. This gives them something to fight for. But there's also a darker calculation here. Because Trump's term ends in January 2029, that's still over 3 years away. And if this Supreme Court ruling stands and Trump keeps pushing the boundaries of executive power, Democrats are genuinely worried about what the presidency will look like by then. They're worried he'll use these powers to interfere with elections, to prosecute political opponents, to ignore laws he doesn't like, to pack agencies with loyalists who will do whatever he says. And honestly, with the legal protections the Supreme Court just gave him, those concerns aren't entirely unreasonable. Are you kidding me? This is the state of our democracy right now, and it's not just Democrats saying this. Justice Sotomayor, who was appointed by Obama, yeah, but she's not exactly a partisan bomb thrower. She wrote in her dissent that this ruling is a grave threat to the Constitution's separation of powers. She warned that unchecked presidential action will erode the foundations of American government. Those are strong words from a Supreme Court justice, and they're not words she uses lightly. Sotomayor has been on the court for over 15 years. She's written dissents before, but legal analysts say this one is different. This one has the tone of someone watching something terrible unfold and feeling powerless to stop it. She basically said the majority is handing future presidents a roadmap for authoritarian rule. Whether they use it or not is up to them, but the tools are now available. But here's what's really interesting. The Supreme Court didn't just wake up one day and decide to give Trump all this power. They've been building to this for months, using something called the shadow docket, which is basically emergency rulings that skip the normal process. No oral arguments, no public hearings. Just here's the decision. Deal with it. Normally, the shadow docket is reserved for genuine emergencies, time-sensitive issues that can't wait for the full process. But under this court, it's become a way to make major policy changes without scrutiny. And the shadow docket has been incredibly favorable to Trump. It's how he's been able to slash agency budgets, freeze congressional appropriations, make major policy changes without going through the usual channels. The court keeps ruling in his favor, fast-tracking decisions that expand presidential power. In the last 6 months alone, there have been over a dozen shadow docket rulings that all went Trump's way, all expanding executive authority, all limiting congressional and judicial oversight. So this latest ruling is not an outlier, it's the culmination of a pattern. And that pattern is reshaping how the executive branch operates. Which means even if Trump leaves office in 2029 or gets impeached before then, the next president inherits all these new powers, and so does the one after that. That's what makes this so much bigger than Trump. This is about the presidency itself. How much authority should one person have? What happens when courts won't stop them? When Congress can't investigate them? When the normal checks on power just don't work anymore? And nobody has good answers, because we're in uncharted territory here. The Supreme Court just rewrote the rules, and we're all watching in real time to see what happens next. The scary part, once you expand presidential power like this, it's almost impossible to roll it back, because what president is going to voluntarily give up that kind of authority? Would a Democratic president say, no thanks, I don't want these powers? Probably not. Would a Republican president after Trump? Definitely not. So we're locked into this new reality now, whether we like it or not. Okay, so let's actually break this down into simple points because there's a lot happening here and it's easy to get lost in the legal jargon and partisan screaming. Point 1, the Supreme Court gave Trump massive new powers over the executive branch. He can fire federal employees without normal oversight. He can block congressional investigations. He can make policy decisions that courts won't review. This is a fundamental shift in how much control a president has. And yeah, presidents have always had significant executive power. That's in the Constitution, but there used to be limits. Courts could step in if the president clearly broke the law. Congress could investigate and demand documents. Federal agencies had some independence from direct presidential control. Career civil servants couldn't just be fired for political reasons. Inspectors general had protection. Whistleblowers had channels. Those limits are basically gone now. Or at least they're so weak that they don't matter much anymore. And this isn't just theoretical. We're already seeing the practical effects of this ruling playing out in real time across federal agencies and in Congress. The Department of Justice just dropped multiple investigations into Trump allies. The State Department recalled ambassadors who criticized Trump's policies. The Treasury Department is stonewalling congressional requests for Trump's tax information. Again, even though they're legally required to provide it. Point 2. Democrats are using this Supreme Court ruling as justification to impeach Trump. They're not even pretending it's about anything else. They're saying the court just made Trump untouchable through normal legal channels, so impeachment is the only option left. And they've introduced articles focusing on emoluments, violations, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. These aren't new charges, but the Supreme Court ruling gives them new urgency, because if they don't act now, they might never get another chance. The window is closing. Trump is moving fast to consolidate his power, and every day that passes makes it harder to stop him. Now, will it work? Probably not, because even if the House impeaches Trump, the Senate needs a 2/3 vote to remove him. Republicans control the Senate, and they're not turning on Trump. Not yet, anyway. The political calculus for Republican senators is pretty simple. Trump is still incredibly popular with Republican voters. Anyone who votes to remove him will face a primary challenge from the right, and they'll probably lose. So this is more about making a statement and forcing votes than actually removing the president. But here's why it still matters. Because those Senate votes will be used in 2026 midterm campaigns. Democrats will run ads saying your senator voted to protect Trump even after he violated the Constitution. And Republicans will say Democrats are trying to overturn the election with fake impeachment charges. And voters will decide who they believe. Early polling suggests the country is split almost exactly down the middle on whether Trump should be impeached, which means this is going to be the dominant issue in the midterms. Point 3. This isn't just about Trump. Whatever precedent gets set here applies to every future president. So if you're cheering because your side is in power right now, think about what happens when the other side wins, because they'll inherit all these same powers and they'll use them. That's how precedent works. Like imagine a Democratic president with these same powers, total control over federal agencies, ability to ignore congressional subpoenas, courts that won't intervene even when actions seem illegal. Would Republicans be okay with that? Of course not. But that's what they're defending right now because it's their guy. And when the shoe's on the other foot, they're going to regret setting this precedent. But by then, it'll be too late because you can't put this genie back in the bottle. Once the Supreme Court says the president has this much power, that becomes the new baseline. And the same goes for Democrats. If they had a president with these powers, would they want Congress and courts to check that power? Probably. But they're not thinking long term. They're thinking about stopping Trump, which is understandable, but it's also short-sighted because power doesn't disappear when your opponents lose. It just transfers to the next person. History is full of examples of people expanding government power to fight their enemies, only to have that power used against them later. We never learn. Point 4. The 2026 midterms are going to be absolutely insane. Both parties are betting everything on them because if Democrats win back the Senate, they can actually remove Trump through impeachment. And if Republicans keep the Senate and maybe flip the House, then Trump gets a free pass for the rest of his term. And these new presidential powers become permanent. So every House race matters, every Senate seat matters, and both sides know it, which means the money, the ads, the campaigning is going to be relentless. We're talking billions of dollars, nonstop attack ads, rallies in every swing district, celebrity endorsements, door-to-door canvassing, phone banking, text messages, social media campaigns. This is going to dominate American politics for the next year, and voters are paying attention because this isn't some abstract debate about policy. This is about whether one person should have this much power, whether courts and Congress can still check the president, whether democracy works the way we thought it did. Those are big questions, and people care about the answers. The polling already shows that voters on both sides see these midterms as potentially the most important in their lifetimes. Turnout is expected to be at presidential election levels, which almost never happens for midterms. Both parties are already targeting key swing districts: Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, These states are going to see more political advertising than they've ever seen before. Point 5. Trust in government is collapsing, and this whole situation is making it worse. Think about it. Democrats say the Supreme Court is partisan and corrupt. Republicans say Democrats are trying to overturn elections they don't like. Independents are watching this circus and losing faith in all of it, and that's dangerous, because democracy only works if people believe in the system, if they think courts are fair, if they think elections matter, if they think their representatives are actually representing them. But when everything becomes partisan warfare, when institutions like the Supreme Court become just another political battleground, people check out, they stop voting, they stop caring, they stop believing that anything they do matters, and that's when things really fall apart. Polling shows trust in the Supreme Court is at an all-time low. Trust in Congress, even lower. Trust in the presidency depends entirely on which party you ask. We're living in two separate realities now. Two separate sets of facts, two separate understandings of what's even happening, and that unsustainable. So yeah, this Supreme Court ruling and the impeachment push aren't just about Trump. They're about whether American government can function anymore, whether the rules still mean anything, whether power can still be checked, and we don't know the answers yet. Here's what happens next. The House will vote on impeachment articles, probably by early 2026. Democrats have the votes to pass them. Then it goes to the Senate for a trial. Republicans will vote to acquit unless something huge changes. And then we're right back where we started, except the 2026 midterms are even closer and the stakes are even higher. The cycle just keeps spinning faster and faster. Meanwhile, Trump will keep using these new powers. He'll keep firing people, freezing budgets, ignoring subpoenas, because he can, because the Supreme Court says so. And Democrats will keep trying to stop him through whatever means they have left, which right now is basically just impeachment and public pressure. And all of this is playing out while the country is deeply divided. Half the country thinks Trump is saving America from corrupt bureaucrats and partisan witch hunts. The other half thinks he's destroying democracy and turning the presidency into a dictatorship, and neither side is listening to the other anymore. So where does that leave us? Honestly, nobody knows. This is uncharted territory. The Supreme Court just rewrote the rules for presidential power. Democrats are trying to impeach Trump before he can fully use that power. Republicans are defending him and preparing for the midterms. And voters are watching all of this, wondering what happened to their country. One thing's for sure, the next few years are going to define American democracy for generations. How much power should a president have? Can courts still check that power? Can Congress? Or are we moving towards something different? Something where the executive branch is so powerful that the other branches don't really matter anymore? Those are the questions we're facing, and the answers are being written right now in Supreme Court decisions, in impeachment votes, in midterm elections. This is history happening in real time, and we're all part of it, whether we want to be or not. So yeah, stay tuned, because this story is far from over, and what happens next is going to shock everyone. Again,